When I gaze at the stars burning in the sky, I say to myself, pondering, what are all these little lights for that fill the infinite air in that deep and endless serene? What does this immense solitude mean? And who am I? This poem by Leopardi wonderfully expresses the experience in which the religious sense of man is revealed. The impact of the chaos with reality triggers the human question. Here in us is a native structure that, when it comes into contact with reality, is inexorably set in motion, thus mobilizing all. The dynamism of our person, as long as he lives, no man can avoid certain questions, regardless of his ethnic or cultural background. What is the ultimate meaning of existence? Why is there pain, death? Why is it worth living after all? Or from another point of view, what is reality made of, and for what purpose? The religious sense, as Don Giussani has always taught us, is identified with the nature of the self as it is expressed in these questions. It coincides with that radical commitment of ourself to life that is documented in these questions. But why? Revisit now, making the text of the religious sense the object of our common work. It is a question that I have been asked on several occasions since we made that decision. The idea emerged from the experience of the last gatherings of the Brotherhood, where I reread 2 chapters of the religious sense from within faith, as I had the opportunity to observe. Everything started from the realization, even within us, who have the grace of being immersed in a certain history of a fragility of faith as knowledge, what we have called the fracture between knowing and believing. We too, that is, participate in the reduction of faith to feeling or ethics. Don Giussani observed that this happens not only where Christianity is no longer presented according to its nature as an event, but also due to a lack of the human in us. Christianity has indeed always reminded us of a great inconvenience. It requires men to be recognized and lived. In the reflections of last year's Brotherhood, I sought, through the rereading of some chapters of the religious sense, to show the nature and dynamics of that humanity which is lacking in us, diminishes, and gets blocked. Many have been struck by the relevance of those chapters to the journey we are undertaking, and have asked me to revisit the entire text together from this perspective. But what does it mean to confront the religious sense from within faith? We are accustomed to understanding the religious sense as a mere premise to faith. Therefore, it seems almost useless to us once faith is attained, as if it were a ladder that we use to climb to the upper floor Once we have ascended, we can do without the ladder. Not only is there a constantly alive religious sense so that Christianity can be recognized and experienced for what it is, as Don Giussani always reminded us by quoting Niebuhr, nothing is as incredible as the answer to a question that is not asked or is no longer asked. But secondly, it is precisely in the encounter with the Christian event that the religious sense reveals all its original significance. A living religious sense therefore represents a verification of faith. In this sense, Don Giussani's response to a question from Angelo Scola during a notable interview is very significant. His pedagogical proposal, Scola asks, leverages the religious sense of man. Is that so? The heart of our proposal, Don Giussani responds, is rather the announcement of an event that occurred, surprising people in the same way that 2,000 years ago, the announcement of the angels in Bethlehem surprised poor shepherds. An event that occurs before any consideration of the religious or non-religious man is the perception of this event that resurrects and enhances that very religious sense. That is, the original evidences if the work of these years on Don Giussani's book can be lived in this way, it has allowed us to see the human novelty that arises from faith, enabling us to verify the relevance of faith to the demands of life. What we are about to undertake on the religious sense will allow us to deepen our understanding of this relevance. It is documented, in fact, in the capacity of faith to awaken the self, to help it become itself, and to keep it in the right position to face all of existence with its trials and complexities. Here then is the perspective from which we will read the text. By retracing the religious sense and engaging with it, we will be able to verify to what extent the experience we have had in these years has managed to impact our lives, or in other words, to express it in the words of Don Giussani, in what way Christ is useful for the journey that man undertakes in relation to things, walking towards his destiny. Otherwise, if it does not have this impact as a real presence, Christ is something that has nothing to do with life, that would not relate to life. It would relate to the future life, but it would not relate to this life, which is the proper position of Protestantism. If Christ is present, it is not by virtue of our words, but through signs that we can recognize him if he acts. This is the rule. We have always been told, I can discover that Christ is present through the signs of my human awakening that I see happening in myself and in others. As objective as its presence is, so are the signs that document it. By engaging with the text and the religious sense, we can verify whether the encounter with Christ has resurrected or enhanced the sense of original dependence, the core of original evidences and needs of truth, justice, happiness, and love, which Don Giussani calls religious sense, and which awaken in the impact of life with reality. Now, if it is true that the emergence of such demanding and original evidence is, in a certain sense, inevitable, it is equally true that the awareness of it is normally reduced, obscured, or silenced. And this is what can be grasped in the weakness or absence, even among us. Perhaps after years of the movement, of meaning, of mystery, in the perfection of ourself, which is thus tragically reduced, much more often than we realize, to a sum of performances, of reactions, as a consequence of historical or biological antecedents, to a product of circumstances. This is why a heightened religious sense, without removal or censorship, constitutes a sign and a verification of the encounter with something greater than oneself. What we have said about the yes can be said about reason, which experience reveals as an operational requirement to explain reality in all its factors, so that man is introduced to the truth of things, challenged by the impact with reality, to be truly itself, that is, in an exhaustive openness, and to set in motion the search for its comprehensive explanation. Reason reaches its authentic peak by intuiting the existence of a beyond from which everything springs and to which everything refers. The pinnacle of the conquest of reason is the perfection of an unknown existence, unattainable, to which all human movement is destined, because it also depends on it, is the idea of mystery. A person who does not block the rational dynamism set in motion by the impact with reality would come to live the awareness of mystery. And the more she lived intensely in reality, the more the dimension of mystery would become familiar to her. But here it is. Great and almost irresistible is the temptation to reduce, to use reason as a measure, instead of as an open window facing the inexhaustible call of the real. The inevitable consequence is the reduction of the perception of reality that is devoid of mystery. It is what can be observed in the destitution of the visible, in the flattening or the emptying of the circumstances of what happens to us, that we normally operate. The reality that originally presents itself to our reason as a sign is reduced to its immediate aspect, stripped of its meaning and depth. And for this reason, many times, each one can verify it in their own experience, we suffocate in the circumstances. When reduced to appearance, reality becomes a cage. As observed years ago by the then Cardinal Ratzinger, one of the functions of faith, and not among the least relevant, is to offer healing, to reason, as reason to not do violence to it, to not remain foreign to it, but to lead it back to itself. The exaltation of reason, the liberation from its reductions, and once again, the verification of a real faith. Now, why is the revival of religious sense so crucial today? Why do we have this urgency? Is it decisive? Because the religious sense is the ultimate criterion of judgment, of a judgment that is true and authentically mine. If we do not want to be deceived, alienated, enslaved by others, or used as instruments, Don Giussani tells us we must get used to comparing everything with that immanent and objective criterion, which is the religious sense. After the Christian encounter, we continue to live in the world and are called to face, like everyone else, the challenges of life. We must confront them in this particular historical moment, dominated by confusion, a decline in desire, a stifling rationalism on one side, and a rampant sentimentalism on the other, as well as the reduction of reality to mere appearance and the heart to feeling. If Christ does not impact us, restoring our humanity and expanding our reason without reducing reality, we find ourselves thinking like everyone else, with the same mindset as everyone, because the criterion of judgment, which we originally possess, the heart, which is reason and affection together, is enveloped in that confusion. This means that we can continue to affirm the truths of faith, but we may not be protagonists in history, as there is no discernible diversity within us, as Cardinal Ratzinger has said. The contribution of Christians is decisive only if the intelligence of faith becomes the intelligence of reality. This, in addition to making us useless for history, increasingly dominated by a power that aims to manage man in confusion, to reduce his desire, and to promote a diminished use of reason, raises the question of the reasonableness of faith. Why is it reasonable to be Christian then? What is the human convenience of faith? The reason why so many abandon their faith is that they find no evidence of its relevance. Thus, power can increasingly expand its influence, finding man ever more disarmed. It is as if power, Giussani says, meaning the dominant mentality, has forced our educators, including parents, to alter the simplicity of our nature, namely the original evidences we mentioned earlier. Therefore, we must reclaim the simplicity of our nature. This community school that writes Ancora Noi Sani on the religious sense is nothing more than an invitation and a stimulus to recover the simplicity and authenticity of our nature. Regarding the incidence of power, we can be complicit if we presumptively think we can manage on our own, without an intelligent and affectionate following of the only point that has been given to us by the mystery, to extract us from nothing. The confusion among us can be so profound that when we try to indicate a solution to the situation in which we live, we find ourselves repeating the answers of everyone. Some believe that the solution lies in reaching an agreement, arriving at a consensus, while others think it can be found in politics through greater participation in the distribution of power, or in a career, in a deeper emotional adventure, and so on, like everyone else. After 2,000 years of Christian history, after years of grace and charisma, we may find ourselves in the situation of men before Christ or before the encounter. An endless variety of ultimately impotent attempts, the mythical arrows of the design in which each emphasizes their own prejudices or the aspects most suited to their nature. Who will free us from this mortal condition, shall we say, with St. Paul? What is necessary? What experience is this that Christ frees us? Second point, Christ clarifies the religious meaning, inviting us to identify with the Gospel of John. Giussani wonderfully describes how this event occurred. Finally, this John, called the Baptist, lived in such a way that all the people were moved by it. And from the Pharisees to the last peasant, they left their homes to go and hear him speak at least once. There may have been many or few, we do not know. On that occasion, however, there were two who were going for the first time. They were all tense, with their mouths open, in the attitude of someone who has come from afar and sees what he has come to see with a curiosity without barriers, with a poverty of spirit, with a childlike or simple heart. At a pushy, certain point, a person separates from the group and walks along the path that follows the river upstream. When they move, the prophet John the Baptist, suddenly inspired, begins to shout, "Behold the Lamb of God, behold him who takes away the sins of the world." The people do not pay attention. But those two, with their mouths open and their eyes wide like two children, see where the gaze of John the Baptist is directed, at that individual who is leaving. Then instinctively, they fall in step behind her, following him, shy and awkward. He notices that someone is following him and turns around. "What do you want?" "Teacher," they replied. "Where do you live?" "Come and see," he kindly says to them. They went and saw where he lived, and they stayed with him that whole day. We easily identify with those two sitting who watched that man speak words never heard before, yet so close, so relevant, so resonant, they did not understand. They were simply caught, dragged, overwhelmed by that speaking. They watched him talk. Because through a gaze, certain men realized that there was something ineffable among them, a presence that was not only unmistakable, but also incomprehensible, and yet so invasive. Invasive because it corresponded to what the heart was waiting for, in a way unmatched by anything. Father, mother, had they not told them when they were small with equal clarity and effectiveness what made the time of their lives worth living? They had not been able or known how to express it. They said many other things that were right and good, but like fragments of something that had to be grasped in the air to see if one qualified as suitable for the other. A deep correspondence. As the words reached them and their dazed and admiring gaze penetrated that man, They felt themselves changing. They felt that things were changing. The meaning of things was changing. The essence of things was changing. The story does not end here, because Giussani imagines the return home of Giovanni and Andrea after their encounter with Christ. When they returned in the evening, at the end of the day, they likely retraced their steps in silence, as they had never spoken to each other, like in that great silence where another was speaking, where he continued to speak and resonated within them. And they arrived home. Andrea's wife, looking at him, said, "What's wrong with you, Andrea? What's wrong?" And the little children, surprised, were looking at their father. It was him. Yes, it was him. But he was more him. He was different. He was him, but he was different. And when, as we said once, moved by an image, easy to think of because it is so realistic, she asked him what happened. And he embraced her. Andrea embraced his woman and embraced his child. It was him, but he had never embraced her like that before. It was like the dawn or the sunrise or the twilight of a different humanity, a new humanity, a truer humanity. As if he were finally saying, without believing his own eyes, but it was too evident, why he would not believe his own eyes. This well-known scene describes better than 1,000 words how the religious sense of man has historically been clarified, because he found his true object by encountering Jesus. Andrew was him, but he was more than him. He was different. In fact, the object, Giussani says, of the religious sense, humanly speaking, is the unfathomable mystery. Therefore, it is incomprehensible that man thinks in such a way as to have 1,000 thoughts on this. But the truth is one. Only that it is unattainable by man. Then the mystery became man, a man who moved with his legs, who ate with his mouth, who cried with his eyes, who died. And this is the true object of the religious sense. Then discovering this fact about Christ reveals to me, clarifies in a magnificent way the religious sense and frees me from all my attempts. This is not merely the application of a universal law. Since man became man, the person finds themselves in a living encounter. But here, in the encounter with the presence of the mystery-made human fact, such law is fulfilled and realized in a definitive way. When I encountered Christ, I discovered myself as a man, says the Roman rhetor Mario Vittorino, publicly announcing his conversion, because it is in an encounter that I become aware of myself. This meeting enables us to discover the mystery of ourself. It was him, but it was more him. He had never been so much himself. Therefore, during a conversation referring to the text, the religious sense, Don Giussani asks, why did we write the book on the religious sense? Because we have encountered Jesus. And by looking at him and feeling him, we understood what was inside us. He who knows you, with a capital Y, knows himself, said St. Augustine. Because to understand the religious sense, To develop the religious sense, we had to meet someone. Without this master, we would not have understood each other. Therefore, I can say to Christ, you are truly me, you are me. And I can say this precisely because by feeling him, I have understood myself. While those who seek to understand themselves, reflecting on themselves, become scattered in myriads of thoughts, paths, and ideas, in billions of images, each one then follows the one that resonates most with them. 3, Christ educates the religious sense. Precisely because Christ reveals and clarifies the religious meaning of man, he can also educate him. Some may think that even those who have encountered Christ live in a Christian context, where, since the religious sense is an original endowment, there is no need for it to be educated, or once awakened, it proceeds on its own, becoming spontaneously the dimension of every moment. The following excerpt from Gnusani helps us understand how misguided this is. During a conversation in which I had the opportunity to be involved, an important university professor let slip this phrase, "If I didn't have chemistry, I would kill myself." Such a game, in our inner dynamics, even if unspoken, always exists. There is always something that makes life worthy, in our eyes to be lived, and without which, even if one does not wish for death, everything would be colorless and disappointing. To that thing, God, man, offers all his devotion. No one can avoid a final implication. Whatever it may be at the moment, when human consciousness corresponds to it through living, it is a religiosity that is expressed. It is a level of religiosity that is realized. The religious sense is characterized by being the ultimate dimension of every gesture, every action, and every type of relationship. The lack of education of the religious sense is precisely documented in this. There exists in us an instinctive repugnance to let the religious sense dominate, determining every action consciously. It is precisely this symptom of the atrophy or partiality of the development of the religious sense within us. That widespread and heavy difficulty, that estrangement we feel when we are told that God is the determinant of everything, is the factor from which one cannot escape. It is the criterion by which choices are made, studies are conducted, the product of one's work is completed, a political party is joined, scientific inquiries are pursued, a wife and husband are sought, and a nation is governed. Everyone can assess the extent to which this aversion to allowing everything in their life to be determined by God takes hold within themselves. He will understand then to what extent he needs to allow himself to be educated in the religious sense. Indeed, Giussani says, the education of the religious sense should, on one hand, promote awareness of the inevitable and total dependence that exists between man and what gives meaning to his life, and on the other hand, help him gradually absorb that unrealistic estrangement he feels towards his original situation. One then understands the reason for the incarnation, the purpose, because God became man, as Giussani says, is to educate man in the religious sense. Because the religious sense is the exact starting position that man has towards all of reality. It is the mystery itself that creates reality, Therefore, following Christ means being in a position to face reality and to walk towards destiny in the best possible way. It is called salvation, just as we have called it here, not in the definitive sense of the term, but in the dispositive sense of the term. If one follows Christ, they are in the best position to face reality and to confront the problem of destiny. But today, we, as we are educated in the religious sense, participate in the life of that reality where Christ remains contemporary, the church. The functionality of the church on the world stage, Don Giussani tells us, is already implicit in its awareness of being the extension of Christ. That is, the extended functionality of Jesus. The role of Jesus in history is the education of man's and humanity's religious sense, where we mean by religiosity or religious sense the exact position as conscious and tentatively as the practical attitude of man in the face of his destiny. This demonstrates the necessity of the permanence of mystery in history. Indeed, if Christ does not remain contemporary and does not continue to challenge man, he returns to being irreparably alone. And only each person knows how far they can fall. How can we free ourselves from this relentless decline? Let us address the final point. Christ saves the religious sense. No one can maintain the right attitude that the encounter with Christ has opened up to them on their own. Therefore, the only response to our fragility is the real permanence of his presence. The historical situation we find ourselves in today in the West constitutes, in this sense, a true challenge even for Christianity, which is compelled to demonstrate the truth of its claim to respond to the demands of man. In fact, no version of Christianity will awaken humanity and man, as we well know, nor will a Christianity reduced to mere discourse. Neither a national identity in the Newmanian sense of the term, nor a Christianity reduced to ethics will be able to pull man out of his stupor, from the increasingly glaring flattening of his desire, his original drive, his zest for life, and in the ability to continuously awaken the human spirit will, the authenticity of Christianity be documented. Only a Christianity that preserves its original nature, its unmistakable traits of contemporary historical presence, the contemporaneity of Christ, can meet the real needs of man and therefore be capable of saving the religious sense. It is not a postulate to accept, but a human novelty to be surprised by. The Christian announcement is subjected to this verification in the court of human experience. If it is the man who accepts belonging to Christ through the reality of the church, concretely and persuasively emerging in his experience through the charisma that has reached us, what he himself, with his own strength, is unable to achieve occurs, namely, an unimaginable awakening and fulfillment of the human in all its fundamental dimensions, then Christianity will reveal itself as credible and will become verifiable in its claim. Every tree, in fact, is recognized by its fruit. Here is the formidable epistemological criterion that Jesus himself offers us. The change brought about by the relationship with the present Christ is such that St. Paul does not hesitate to exclaim, "If anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old things have passed away. Behold, new things have come." The new creature is the man in whom the religious sense is realized in its otherwise impossible fullness, reason, freedom, affection, desire. "Christ brings me everything. How beautiful he is," exclaimed Jacopone da Todi. And this beauty, as the splendor of the true, is the only one capable of rekindling the desire of man, and so powerfully moving affection, that it makes the continuous opening of his reason to the descending reality possible. Because the condition for reason to be reason is that affection invests it and thus moves the whole man. The attraction of Christ facilitates but does not automatically bring about that openness which would be impossible without him. The contemporaneity of Christ thus allows reason to fully open, enabling it to reach an understanding of reality that was previously unknown. Everything, every circumstance, even the most trivial, is exalted, becomes a sign, speaks, and is interesting to live. The man thus awakened and supported by the presence of Christ can finally live as a religious man. To endure the vertigo of life, circumstance after circumstance, being able to enter into any situation of existence, in any circumstance, with a deep tranquility and with a possibility or capacity for joy, says Don Giussani. The contemporaneity of Christ thus reveals itself as essential for fully living the religious sense. That is, for having the right attitude towards the real. If, on the contrary, Christ is not lived as contemporary, the consequences are not long in coming. The lack of experience of the contemporaneity of Christ leads one back to the situation prior to the Christian encounter. And even if we continue to talk about Christ, as often happens, we effectively reduce him to a deleterious variant of religious sense. For modern man, this is a truly sharp observation by Don Giussani that makes us truly aware of the situation we are living in. Faith, new. Generically nothing more than an aspect of religiosity, a type of feeling with which to live the enriched, search for one's origin and destiny, which is precisely the most evocative element of religions. All of modern consciousness is agitated to extract from man the hypothesis of the Christian faith and to relate it to the dynamics of religious sense, to the concept of religiosity. And this confusion, unfortunately, penetrates the mentality of the Christian people. There is an essential and irreducible difference between the dynamics of faith and religious sense. While religiosity, says Don Giussani, arises from the need for meaning awakened by the impact with reality, faith is recognizing an exceptional presence that corresponds in such a way to one's destiny and adhering to this presence. Such a difference is especially evident in the way reason operates. In the Christian faith, there is no longer, as in a religious sense, a reason that explains, but a reason that opens up, thus finally perceiving its dynamic in the revelation of God himself. It is then understood why Don Giussani says that the problem is one of intelligence, not of feeling or mood. The problem of intelligence is entirely within the episode of John and Andrew. Faith is an act of reason, driven by the particularity of a presence. Therefore, let us imagine what a challenge the claim of faith represents for the modern mindset, that there exists a man to whom I can say you, who can say you can do nothing about me, that there exists, in other words, a man God. One never fully measures up to such a claim. But what we are particularly interested in now is to focus on the consequences of rejecting the method chosen by God to respond to the need for the total meaning of man and the religious sense. Without the recognition of the present mystery, the night advances, confusion advances, rebellion advances, and disappointment fills to such an extent that it is as if nothing is expected anymore. And one lives without desiring anything more, except for the furtive satisfaction of a brief request. Without the recognition of the contemporaneity of Christ, what emerges or fails to emerge is the true human, the impulse of religious sense. Whoever recognizes it sees their humanity taken beyond all imagination. That our consciousness, our way of thinking, our affection be converted to Christ, says Giussani, means that continuously such consciousness and affection are led, transported to places they would have never thought of. They are constantly urged to go beyond themselves. They go out of themselves. They are continuously brought into a ground, into a territory, beyond what was previously conceived and felt. It is always in the unknown that they are introduced. It is a measure that expands. Consciousness and affectivity are continuously introduced into an unforeseen horizon beyond one's own measure. And life gains a breadth, a scope, a capacity to live, never known before. Each of us also has the criterion for verifying our journey of faith, our education in religious sense, which is the exaltation of our original humanity. Truly I say to you, unless you convert and become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. This could be the summarizing formula of a true education in religious sense. And for this reason, Christ calls blessed those who have it. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. These passages show us the true purpose of this education: to open ourself, our heart, our capacity to receive so much that we can be filled with something that we cannot produce ourselves, but that we must accept, welcome, and embrace as a gift. Only those who have this childlike simplicity, this poverty of spirit, are ready to receive it. The work that awaits us this year on the text of religious sense has this level of decisiveness. The seriousness with which we approach it will determine our realization as individuals and the contribution we can make to our fellow human beings